Welcome to A Shelter in a Time of Storm. My name is Roger Comstock. I'm the minister at the Morrison Church of Christ in Morrison, Tennessee. I'm glad you could be with us today. As we've said on, I guess, nearly every program, the thought behind this program is to try to help people maintain their faith or maybe grow their faith in God through the tragedies and the difficult things that face us in life, and how we get through those storms of life and how we can rely on God to help us through those difficult things. We have a special guest with us today. Beth Baker is the author of a book about her son and her family and their journey through Caleb's life. And the name of the book is Giving Him Back to God, Caleb's Journey. Caleb only lived about 9 short years in this world, and his life was plagued with physical problems, and we've been discussing those and some of the things from Beth's book with her. And as I said, we're happy to have you with us today, Beth. Beth and her family are members of the Maple Hill Church of Christ in Paducah, Kentucky, and it's quite interesting to me. Beth's book is quite interesting, and it's rare to find a family that will share their journey as they have, and part of what's behind their willingness to share that journey is knowing that others can be helped by the journey they have walked, and that other people can grow and learn from them as well. In our previous program, we had talked about the early years of Caleb's life and how at about age 3 he was diagnosed with autism, and then not long after that he was diagnosed with epilepsy, and seizures became a part of the normal life in the Baker household. Oftentimes, on average, maybe 100 seizures a day. And so we want to kind of continue that discussion with Beth and try to understand a little bit about what's going on in their life and through these changes, and the changes in Caleb's care to provide for him the best possible medical care. Again, Beth, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
And thank you for being willing to share your family's journey with us and with our listening audience.
Thank you.
When we last talked, we were at kind of a point where we were talking about the kinds of seizures and the numbers of seizures. What I'd like to do is go on from there, and I'm just my own curiosity. Things. And you used the word regressed about his educationally, I guess you could say,
Sure.
and cognitively.
Sure.
And physically, I'm curious also, because it seems as though from the book, I'm curious as to how he had major stomach problems, if I could say it that way, major respiratory problems that developed. And you used a phrase in the book about putting out fires. And it seems as though your care as a mother and your learning about all that was going wrong in Caleb, in his body, that it's almost as if most of his years for you were spent putting out fires.
Sure.
And we talked about his physical ability for his brain to work around medications and go back to what the brain wanted to do, that was normal for his brain. So let's kind of begin, and if we could, the first thing, if I remember right, there developed some stomach problems. If you could talk about that a little bit, if you would.
He, in being in public school, you're around all kinds of germs.
Sure.
And he was having seizures all the time, and it was keeping a teacher and an aide very busy taking care of him. And as his seizures continually progressed into more and more daily, then we also saw a lot of problems in feeding him. He got to where it was difficult to, and he'd always been a little chubby boy and loved to eat, and bacon was his favorite food, and when you go from a healthy child who's able to eat whatever they want to a child that, once we took him out of public school just to keep him away from germs and to try to help the seizures be under better control, we thought we kind of staved off some of those stomach issues because we thought, he's catching things.
Right.
We felt like maybe it was a virus or maybe it was, something, that would just pass. But we quickly found that, he was not able to take in food as he should. And because of that, then also his respiratory was compromised, and he was actually having problems swallowing food, and it was actually aspirating into his lungs.
Right.
So he developed a double pneumonia that was clearly from nothing but aspirating food. And then we knew that we were going to have to move to a different form of feeding. I'd been feeding him baby food. And he was 7 years old, and that's a tough one for a mom to swallow. It was terrible. And a lot of the family were like, don't talk about a G-tube, don't, let's not think about that. But I think rationally I knew in my mind that that's where we were going. Right. And so it was a difficult choice, but when I saw what he was eating and then when I looked on imaging and I saw food and water go right over into his lungs, you're just crippling your child. Right. So it's it wasn't about me. I mean, I'd just soon feed him bacon, not baby food, and I sure would rather do that than place a G-tube. But he had moved past that point. He had he'd gone way past where I was comfortable, and so the fall of '08, we had a G-tube placed, and we began his feeds through a tube system, and I forbid anyone to eat in front of him for 2 months. I mean, we just absolutely would not. Sure. I thought, he's going to feel like he's starving, and right. I don't want him to see me put food in my mouth, and then I can't offer it to him. Right. That's not fair to a kid. Right. And the day that he brought me a tube, I knew we were okay, and so from that point on, he's like, look, this is the method, and somebody needs to plug me in because I'm hungry, and I'd worried about that. I'd worried about him, missing that kind, the feeding that you get from, but when he grabbed the feeding tube, I knew we were okay.
So, do you know physiologically how the stomach problems was all of that connected to his brain? Yes. Not making the right kinds of connections?
A lot of people will argue with you, but there is a huge neuro and GI connection. Huge.
Interesting.
And for every time his seizures would increase, his gut would slow. He would become more constipated, not being able to move his bowels as he should. So, and I had the data to show them that, so they couldn't argue with me very much about that. So.
Well, I told you earlier, I was amazed at your meticulous record keeping, which was all for his care.
Sure.
The connections between the neurological things and the stomach things. Reflux was a problem. Sure. You mentioned aspiration. Sure. From your book, you tell that you basically had to tie off the top of his stomach to keep he was refluxing. I don't know if that's the right term, and it was then aspirating what he would reflux.
Sure, and that was even obvious in hospital. We had placed a tube into his stomach and through his nose. It was an NG prior to the G-tube placement, and respiratory came in. Of course, we're working off pneumonia, and so respiratory came in, and she started pulling milk out of his lungs. And I'm like, this, we're not putting it down his mouth. There should be no reason other than it coming from his stomach and and coming back up. And so, luckily the surgical staff and all the staff there were very open to listening. And when the surgeon came out, he said, "You were right." And he said the top portion of his stomach was just eroded because of reflux. And so, we made the right choice in going ahead and doing that procedure and having it's called a fundoplication. They tied off the top of his stomach when they placed the G-tube. And so, we did both at once, just to keep that from happening. I mean, eventually we'd have gone that route if we'd not taken care of it then. So we were very concerned about getting it done.
So do you have any idea why did the stomach problems, how happened that brought it? Why didn't that start at the beginning? How did it regress or progress to that point? Do you know physiologically?
I would just say clearly the number for once you're talking about thousands of seizures in a month.
I see.
I can't imagine your body being able to do anything.
So his body was reacting
normally
to seizures.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
You know, and for every increase, you know, a day of increase would be 2 days of me trying to get his bowels back in check.
Yeah.
You know, so you're constantly fighting that battle. And you know, if he has a good day, maybe we have regular, you know, stomach movement that day, and so you know that would be one to be grateful for. But
Sure.
There was always a connection. There was always something that coincided, and keeping those charts were more for, you know, I was completely not in control of those seizures, and that was the only thing I could control, was just documenting what was going on in hopes that somebody could look at what I'd recorded and be able to, you know, have some kind of idea. You know, maybe, you know, it would shed new light on their thinking about how they approached him with treatment. And so I think it kept him with us years longer because of the treatment, because of me being able to keep the notes and having a doctor who was concerned enough to listen to that and to take that into consideration on a weekly basis and make sure that we were taking care of him.
What, as these fires, as we mentioned, you were constantly putting out fires and sometimes trying to use medications to put out fires, changing diet. You talk a lot about kinetic, is that the right term?
Ketogenic.
I knew I'd mess it up.
That's all right.
A special diet that would help, and it did help.
Sure.
And then problems with the tube of being able to literally get enough calories into him to maintain his body and so forth. The respiratory problems, another, you think, sort of a side effect from the seizures?
Sure. I think his body was just, I mean, really, you know, looking back, he was dying years, you know, and if you know, we didn't want to go there and think about that. Sure. But, you know, looking back, it was all, he was going through end of life things that were happening to him. And for each of those things, you know, we would combat the symptoms as well as we could. And then, you know, just fight whatever came next, because that was the only option, was just to continually put those fires out and seeing how we could come together and treat him as a whole child, and make him comfortable. And, you know, looking back on even the last year of his life, you know, he was not with us a whole lot cognitively, but you know, we tried to do things with him that he would enjoy, and you come to appreciate some of the smaller things in life. You know, sometimes we might get a smile once a month. You know, that's kind of tough to live on, you know,
understand.
as a mom.
Sure.
But appreciating those things on a much smaller level made putting out the fires a whole lot easier to do.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, or really commend you on, in reading the book, I wish I had kept count. I wish I had a concordance for your book that I would, one sort of general statement, and you said it a few different ways in the book, but a basic statement that I saw, I guess, dozens of times in your book, and the statement was, "And we were thankful."
Sure.
And I really commend you for your, and I know it's not always easy to keep a positive attitude when you see your child suffering, and just to be able to take those victories. And you know, so many times in life, we sing a song, "Count your many blessings, name them one by one." And if all of us would do that, we would be more aware of our blessings. But for you and your family, with so many not good things, so many hurdles, so many fires to put out, to glory in the little things is really good for you and your family.
Thank you.
Some words. Let me just throw some words at you that from your book, and if you could just give me just a brief response to each word. And I'm not a psychiatrist, and even though you're on the couch, we're not going to. Just words that clicked in my reading. Maybe the first one, wheelchair. And the reason I say that, I guess what I'm kind of fishing for is these steps downward.
Sure.
That what was your reaction when first you came to accept the fact that we have to go to a wheelchair?
Well, now I want to cry about it, but
Sure.
at the time, I was just thrilled that insurance decided to give us a wheelchair.
Well, again,
I
celebrate
mean,
the victories.
now I could just, it hurts me to think that we had to go there.
Right.
But at the time, I was in such a fighting mode.
Good for you.
That I was just determined that somebody was going to give me a method in which to transport my child, because we weren't staying at home all the time.
Right.
And I was adamant about him having as many opportunities as he possibly could, and they were limited. But if we could travel, he was traveling with us, and the car was a comfort to him. For me to manage lifting him to get him into the vehicle was not. I mean, it was tough, and he was a big boy, and it just became an everyday struggle, and it took a lot of time to get them to just give us something that we had to have, and it was a blessing to have a wheelchair.
Sure.
It really was, as much as it hurt,
Right.
And my sister said to me, she was like, we had to use the wheelchair for the first time today, and I didn't know how you're going to be with it, but I was in such of the mode of, we have a wheelchair, that I didn't allow myself to go there,
So that overrode the negative side of my child has to be in a wheelchair.
Right. I was just thrilled that I didn't have to try to carry him through the hospital to go get a blood draw, And when we got home, she said that to me, and I was like, yeah, we did. It was the first time we really used it, and so, you mourn those little losses along the way. And I think we grieved little things for him,
Sure.
a little at a time,
Sure.
along the road. You can't have continual regression and not grieve every loss that they have. Right. And we did. Right. I grieved every one of them. But, the biggest lesson that someone told me were meet him where he is every day. And not every day looked the same. And what you got the day before may be completely different from the next moment even. And that was a big struggle to just to never know where you're going to be in the next 5 minutes, because sometimes everything could be completely calm, normal, and the next 5 minutes we were in an ambulance on our way, and so accepting that as normal, it's kind of hard to deal with, but yeah, wheelchair was tough.
In your book, you sing the praises of Vanderbilt University Hospital and the doctors there, not just their medical knowledge, but their attitudes, their compassion for Caleb and for your family. Certainly is commendable of them. Needs to be more of that, certainly.
Absolutely.
You mentioned one time, I believe it was Dr. Barnes, he told you that he might not make it to his 18th birthday. At that time, he was what, probably 6 or 7?
Yeah, probably 7.
And can you talk about what was that like for a mama to hear?
I think we needed to hear it at the time. We'd got the initial diagnosis, and we wanted a translation of what that meant. And we kind of pressed for it. And luckily, he was honest with us. And I think we each had our own little meltdown on the way home. Ellen would cry for a while, and then I would cry for a while, and then my husband would cry for a while. And it was hard, and it was hard to go home to our family.
I understand. And those people who have been such a big support, I can understand how hard that must have been for all of them.
I can remember coming in, and they were all sitting on the couch, and they were waiting, and that was a tough day.
I don't doubt it a bit, and appreciate you being willing to share that with us. The things, as things continued a downward spiral in Caleb's life, and again, I don't mean to touch those tender spots,
okay.
but when did you come to a point that you said, we've done all we're going to do? Maybe not necessarily all we can do, but this has been enough. And one of the things I remember from, maybe it may have been Dr. Barnes, I don't recall from the book, you'll recall, but one of the doctors said, when you asked about the things going on in Caleb, the one particular doctor responded to you that Caleb would tell you.
Yeah.
Well, Caleb wasn't able to convey things through speech.
Yeah.
But, and I suspect mamas and kids have a special language,
Sure.
An unspoken language.
Sure.
But it was interesting that he would say to you that Caleb will tell you what he needs.
That was Dr. Paul Moore, and he was our pulmonologist. And, you know, he took an overall approach to Caleb. I mean, he always listened to his lungs, but he always asked what was going on with neuro, and always asked what was going on with GI. And he told us that. And I think the beginning of 2010, I knew where we were going, just as a mom. And I probably did not allude to that with how I treated him, because I wanted to afford him every opportunity he was going to have left on this earth to have some happiness. So we went on our Make-A-Wish trip, and that alone was difficult to deal with, because you don't take that when your kid's well and wonderful and everything's rosy.
There's a statement there.
They don't come to you and say, go to Disney World with your kid if something's not wrong.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And it was a tough trip for him. He was not well before we left. When we got back, we were back in the hospital after we got home. But it was a short while of just being together as a family and having some normalcy, because when you go to a place, they sent us to Give Kids the World, and when you go to a place like that where everyone is ill, you know, you're normal.
And you're one of them.
You fit in, you know, and there is no, you know, everybody's walking a similar path. And so it was a good trip. We made sure to go to Gatlinburg that fall, and made sure for my husband to take some time off so that we could do that. We traveled a lot the last year, but I knew that, I mean, just in looking at him and knowing what he was able to deal with medically, I knew that things were deteriorating quickly.
And you mentioned the traveling that you were able to do, and Make-A-Wish is a phenomenal organization.
Yes.
And I was not familiar with the other one you mentioned.
Yes, Give Kids the World.
Give
and
Kids
most
the
people
World.
don't know about it, but if there is a wish child, any wish organization, when they send a child to Disney World, that's the village that they stay at. And we had the opportunity this year on his birthday to go and volunteer.
Wow.
And
great.
so that was a wonderful way to honor him and allow the girls to go back to somewhere that was familiar,
Right.
you know, but to kind of pay forward, you know, the blessings that we received there.
Well, and again, Beth, it speaks highly of you and your family that you're willing, even though that aspect of your family's life, as far as Caleb was concerned, he wasn't there in the picture, but yet you're still willing to share with other families and volunteer. I'm sure you're right. It had to be very comforting to those families, but also I would imagine it was very healing for you and your family to give back. One of the things that people learn as they work their way through grieving is that in giving, you really receive.
Sure.
And it's a biblical principle.
Sure.
But certainly as you give of yourself, that you also receive a benefit from it, and a blessing in some way.
Right.
All of these, the physical ailments, can you give me just sort of a brief hint of what your prayers were?
It started with healing, of course, you know, but I think quickly I realized that it needed to be more for comfort for him and strength for me, because I knew we had a long way to go, and and especially the last year, more of comfort for him. And when the doctors and nurses all come in and they say, you know, we're going to do palliative care, that's not easy to take.
Sure.
But on some level, I was relieved, because I've been trying to comfort him for so long, and we're meeting with obstacles and people still trying to do procedures, and people still, you know, they wanted to fix him as much as I did.
Sure.
But I knew we were past that, and so his last hospitalization was difficult, because we knew where we were going for sure, and they were in agreement with us, and they knew, and you know, while sometimes you're faced with things that are terrible that you don't ever want to think of, you know, sometimes God gives us blessings that we don't see as blessings immediately.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
I mean, autism was not, and epilepsy was terribly not, and for him to endure all the things he did have to endure, you know, those in themselves were not blessings, but he was a blessing to us.
Right.
And for every one of those things, for every moment of his journey, I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
Well, you know, a term that we hear a lot are special needs children.
Sure.
And it's my belief that special needs children are in special homes and they're in special families.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you know, it's not within us to know how God does what He does providentially, but I believe most special needs children are in special families, and it takes special people to care for them.
Sure.
We had mentioned earlier that there will be some contact information at the close of our program where you can get Beth's book about Caleb's journey. Caleb's journey on this earth ended on January the 15th of last year, 2011. And but you know, it's remarkable how Caleb continues to speak through his family, through Beth's book. He continues to teach. Even though his earthly journey was finished, life's journey for the rest of us still continues. And so Caleb has an impact as his story is told and shared. And I have great respect and love for the Baker family and what they have been through, how they have maintained their faith and their trust in God, and that faith and the positive attitude that has helped them be able to share the story of their family's journey. I'm glad that you could be with us today. Stay tuned. We're going to do some more with the Baker family. Have a great day.